Imagine your hot water tank just broke. What if I told you a simple pile of wood chips, costing around 300 bucks, could pump out 140-degree water for half a year without stopping? A guy in France actually perfected this back in the 70s. Let me show you the science behind it. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of the build, you need to hear what a French woodland manager accomplished in his own yard, using nothing but decaying brush and some rolled-up tubing. His name was Jean Pain. Back in 1964, the French authorities gave him control of almost 600 acres of parched forest down in the Provence region, a spot named Domaine des Templiers. His job was pretty straightforward. Get rid of the dry brush, eliminate the threat of forest fires, or watch the nearby towns go up in flames every July. The officials in Paris just saw this brush as a trash issue. But to Pain, it was an endless supply of free energy, and the government was literally compensating him to haul it off. He dedicated his first 8 years to tinkering. He tried tiny heaps, square piles, varying the sizes of the mulch, and playing with different watering schedules. The majority of these initial mounds just rotted cold and turned sour. Folks living nearby assumed he had lost his mind. His wife, Ida, a former schoolteacher, kept the household running while he chased an idea that everyone else laughed off. The turning point finally arrived on a freezing morning in March. Pain was strolling by one of his older, forgotten test mounds when he noticed the air just above it rippling. It was heat distortion, exactly like what you see hovering over a blacktop road in mid-July. He shoved his bare hand straight into the side of the mulch and immediately jerked it away, steaming. Deep inside that dome, a crude buried thermometer was sitting at 140 degrees. That pile had been resting in his yard for 9 solid months. Nobody had touched it. Then, in 1972, he took it to the next level. He ground up 50 tons of forest scrap, soaked it thoroughly, and packed it into a massive mound. It resembled a giant black-tarped igloo, 6 meters wide and 3 meters high, 50 tons of wet, heavy mulch compressing itself down into a perfect circle. Buried within that mass, winding back and forth like a coiled snake, sat 200 meters of polyethylene tubing. Roughly 656 feet of the exact same plastic piping you'll find encased under modern American concrete slabs today. Freezing groundwater flowed into one end, and by the time it traveled through to the exit, it had reached 60 degrees Celsius. That translates to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, flowing at 4 liters a minute, continuously, for 18 months straight. Pain hooked this directly into his 1,000-square-foot Provence home. The radiators radiated warmth the entire winter. The kitchen faucet poured out scalding water all summer long. Ida didn't open a single propane bill for a year and a half, and his only source of fuel was a giant mound of wood scraps that the state would have happily paid him to burn instead of compost. When Reader's Digest picked up the tale in 1981, the article was translated into 16 different languages. 25,000 letters poured into a rural French farmhouse from nations Pain had never even heard of. People were begging for the blueprints, asking to see the math, demanding to know how a regular guy without a university degree rigged up a heating system that worked better than the gas monopolies, and then he died. Bladder cancer. He was 52 years old. The mound outlasted him by less than a decade. The manual Pain co-authored with Ida during that decade, Another Kind of Garden, covering the Pain method in the original French, went out of print shortly after his death. The oil crisis ended. Energy was cheap once more. The world moved on. The utility companies in America went right back to selling natural gas for pennies. Nobody wanted a giant wood pile in their backyard when they could just push a button on a kitchen thermostat. But the science Pain documented didn't go anywhere. That's because the process happening inside that massive pile wasn't some kind of illusion or accidental magic. It was simply bacteria doing exactly what bacteria have been doing on Earth for the last 2 billion years. If you want to grasp how a pile of mulch can heat a house for 6 months, and realize this isn't some mystical woo-woo, but the exact same chemistry your own stomach uses when you digest a slice of toast, you need to look at what's going on between those individual scraps of wood. Once wood chips are soaked, they don't just stay dormant, they begin to decompose. And decompose is really just a polite term for what's taking place. Billions of microbes are literally devouring the cellulose inside that timber, severing the carbon-hydrogen bonds, and discharging that stored energy as pure heat. I'm not speaking metaphorically here. This isn't a clever comparison. The chemical process occurring inside that wet mulch is identical to the reaction happening inside your fireplace when you burn a piece of firewood. It's the exact same fuel. The chemical bonds are identical. The carbon, the oxygen, and the hydrogen all wind up in the exact same states. The single difference is the velocity. A blazing fire unleashes all that energy in about 10 minutes. Bacteria slowly release it over the course of 6 months. It's the same power source, just drawn out 2,000 times slower. On a chemical level, cellulose contains roughly 17 million joules of energy for every kilogram. Pound for pound, that is almost half the energy density you get from liquid gasoline. A well-built modern compost pile can harness around 3 to 4 megajoules of that potential. Let's call it 20 to 25%. But over a span of months, that sustained heat is entirely sufficient to operate a residential water heater continuously without drawing a single watt of electricity from the city grid. So who are the workers down there? Mainly, it's 2 genera of bacteria. The primary one is Bacillus. And within that specific family, there is an absolute powerhouse known as Geobacillus thermophilus. It's a mouthful, but Cornell University will back that up. This organism has been heavily documented in peer-reviewed science since the 1970s. It's actually the same genus utilized in massive industrial pasteurization facilities and high-heat lab autoclaves, simply because nothing else can endure the extreme conditions that it can. The second main player is called Thermus. This is the exact same bacterial family responsible for those boiling hot springs in Yellowstone that biologists first studied a half-century ago. Both of these microscopic organisms absolutely crave heat. Their sweet spot is right around 130 to 140 degrees Fahrenheit. If you put them in your refrigerator, they'd be miserable. At normal room temperature, they wouldn't survive at all. However, deep inside the dark, damp, oxygen-heavy core of a mulch pile, they awaken by the trillions and immediately get to labor. Look at it like this. Your digestive tract performs similar microbial chemistry constantly. Whenever you eat a sandwich, mesophilic bacteria living in your intestines digest those starches and let off tiny bursts of heat. That process is actually a big reason why your internal body temperature holds steady at 98.6 degrees, regardless of how cold it is outside. The microorganisms inside a pain mound are doing exactly what your stomach does, only they operate at a much higher temperature, they consume a much tougher fuel, and they do it on a drastically extended timeline. It's the identical chemistry, just operating on a different factory floor. And here is the crucial detail that almost no one talks about. This pile has an automatic thermostat. It isn't a digital sensor, it's a living, microbial one. Once the heat climbs past 149 degrees Fahrenheit, around 65 Celsius, the vast majority of these oxygen-breathing decomposers begin to die off. If the temperature somehow breaches 160, they're completely wiped out. The very microbes generating that heat effectively cook themselves to death. When that happens, the chemical reaction decelerates, the core temperature dips, the surviving bugs bounce back, and the whole cycle kicks off again. The mound maintains a remarkably steady cruising altitude, somewhere between 130 and 145 degrees Fahrenheit, provided you keep feeding it. This is exactly why a conventional propane heater can spiral into a dangerous thermal meltdown, while a gene pain mound simply cannot. A metal propane tank has no idea how hot it is. It requires electronic sensors, relays, and emergency pressure valves just to prevent an explosion. These bacteria don't require any of those safeguards. They just perish when it gets too hot, and nature utilizes that exact die-off as an automatic brake. It is arguably the most elegant feedback loop in all of biology. The pile physically cannot burn hotter than its own operators can tolerate. You honestly couldn't design a safer heating mechanism if you tried. However, there is one crucial factor Payne had to learn the hard way, and it's the exact same detail that trips up almost everyone trying to recreate his system today. It actually has nothing to do with the bugs themselves. It's all about their diet. Wood chips are predominantly carbon. We're talking about a ratio of roughly 400 parts carbon to just 1 single part nitrogen. The microbes can't survive on that alone. They absolutely need nitrogen to construct enzymes and build cell walls so they can actually digest that carbon. Without the nitrogen, the pile does nothing. It just sits there. It decomposes cold, sluggishly, and starts to stink. Or even worse, it turns anaerobic, smells like a stagnant marsh, and generates zero usable heat. The golden ratio you're aiming for is 25 to 30 parts carbon for every 1 part nitrogen. That is the exact balance these microbes demand. It's the identical formula that drives every healthy soil ecosystem on the planet, and it's the recipe Payne perfected through 15 years of relentless trial and error in his French yard. So, how exactly do you bridge the gap from 400 down to 30? You introduce nitrogen. But I don't mean synthetic chemicals or bagged urea from the local hardware store. I'm talking about organic nitrogen, the stuff that's already lying around on every homestead, in every backyard, and in every kitchen. Take fresh grass clippings. Green, untreated, unmowed for a week. They naturally sit at around 20 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen, making them about 20 times richer and wetter than standard wood mulch. Dumping a single garbage can full of lawn clippings into a dormant mound will transform it into a blazing furnace in a matter of days. Then there's manure. Cow, horse, rabbit, chicken. Every single one of these animals concentrates heavy nitrogen through their digestive tract. Chicken manure runs the hottest at a 10-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. It's so potent that it can actually burn through your pile's fuel way too fast if you dump in too much at once. Or, there's one more option, a variable, Payne explicitly detailed in his own writings without any hesitation: human urine. He wasn't trying to be polite or embarrassed about it. Payne proved that standard household urine, poured weekly around the outer edges of the mound, was completely sufficient to maintain the required carbon-nitrogen balance for a typical home setup. It is quite literally the cheapest source of nitrogen on Earth. It's totally sterile when fresh, and you just flush it down into the municipal sewer every single day. Mix up your carbon, fold in the nitrogen, and drench the whole thing with water until it's seeping out the bottom. Throw a heavy tarp over it, stake it to the ground securely, and let the microorganisms go to work. That is the secret. Carbon, nitrogen, hydration, and time. That's the vital information Reader's Digest conveniently left out back in 1981, which is exactly why so many backyard experiments failed during the 80s. People were just dumping dry timber scraps into their gardens and expecting steam that was never going to appear. No one explained that the formula required a second element, a third element, a heavy cover, and 3 solid months of patience. When a pile fails, there's no mistaking it. A dead mound might look totally fine on the surface, but the second you plunge your hand past the outer layer, it smells like swamp gas. The mulch feels cold against your skin, and the water flowing through the buried pipes won't even crack 80 degrees. If you dig it open, you won't find hot, steaming wood chips. You'll find a black, slimy, anaerobic mess. Fortunately, the solution is purely mechanical. Spread the pile open to dry it out, fold in some fresh nitrogen and water, stack the layers back up, and your bacterial workforce will be back online and producing heat within a fortnight. So, if Gene Payne's massive industrial-scale setup required 50 tons of brush and over 600 feet of tubing, and the science guarantees a steady 140 degrees, what is the actual price tag for a residential version? And exactly how big of a pile is required to supply your daily hot water needs? You aren't going to need 50 tons, and you certainly don't need to own a forest. You just need a patch of grass roughly the dimensions of a parking spot, 3 to 5 cubic meters of mulch, and a long roll of plastic pipe. Let's look at the materials list using current pricing. 200 feet of half-inch PEX tubing, the exact same stuff used for radiant floor heating under concrete slabs across America. That runs about $95 at your local hardware store. This is the core of your system, the subterranean coil that harvests the thermal energy as the microbes generate it. Next, a heavy-duty 8x10 black mesh tarp to enclose the pile and lock in moisture. That's $30. You'll also need a compact hot water recirculating pump, a solid brass spigot, 50 feet of standard garden hose, and the necessary brass adapters to route that heated water directly into your home's hot water tank. Altogether, figure around $75 for those. Finally, budget another $100 for miscellaneous hardware, some wire fencing, steel T-posts for structure, a couple buckets of your chosen nitrogen source, a pack of zip ties, several stainless steel hose clamps, and some standard foam insulation sleeves to protect the pipes running from the yard into your house. Grand total, $300. That covers your entire equipment cost. As for the wood chips, those are completely free. You can use services like Chip Drop, which allows local tree trimming companies to unload their daily haul right onto your driveway at absolutely no charge. These companies actually pay fees to get rid of the exact same organic waste that the French government paid Jean Pain to remove. It's a beautiful irony that the traditional energy sector probably hopes you overlook. About 10 years ago, researchers at Cornell University actually crunched the numbers on this specific setup. They discovered that a single ton of actively rotting mulch generates roughly 1,000 BTUs of heat per hour continuously. So, a 4 cubic meter residential pile, weighing a ton and a half, will produce somewhere around 1,500 BTUs an hour without stopping. An average American family requires roughly 2,000 BTUs per hour to keep a standard 40-gallon water tank fully heated for regular daily showers and dishes. Just build your mound about a foot wider, and you perfectly match that demand. Nailing the chip size is critical. You want pieces around 3/4 of an inch. Do not use fine sawdust, and avoid large chunks or branches. Sawdust compresses far too densely and suffocates the pile, causing it to go anaerobic. Large logs create massive air pockets that bleed off all your precious heat. 3/4 of an inch is the absolute sweet spot that took Payne 5 years of trial and error to figure out. Soak the material thoroughly until water bleeds from the base. Integrate your nitrogen source layer by layer as you stack the heap. Wind your PEX tubing in wide concentric circles, elevating each loop a few inches above the previous one, working your way to the top of the structure. Cover the whole thing with your tarp and anchor it firmly against harsh weather. Feed cold water into the system in the morning and pull steaming water from your tank by the evening. Just keep the recirculation speed slow. During the initial 2 weeks, the temperature will rise gradually. The bacterial colony requires that time to multiply and establish dominance. Right around day 15, you'll be reading 130 degrees at the center. By day 30, you'll hit a steady 140. From that point on, you are locked in for half a year of zero-cost hot water until the microbes finally exhaust their fuel supply, at which point you simply tear it down and rebuild it with your next free load of mulch. Upkeep is incredibly low effort. Just walk by the pile once a week, shove your hand about 6 inches into the side, and gauge the heat. If it feels hot, leave it alone. If it feels cooler than your skin temperature, your carbon to nitrogen ratio has drifted. Just toss a bucket of fresh lawn clippings or manure onto the exterior, spray it down with a hose, and those bacteria will roar back to life within a couple of days. For folks living in freezing climates, you can easily wrap the exterior of the tarp in a thick layer of straw insulation when winter hits. This prevents the frost line from penetrating and disrupting the active bacterial core. The research from Cornell, Jean Payne's historical records, and modern data from composting networks up in Vermont all align perfectly on that same metric. 6 months of relentless, reliable heat output from a backyard scale system. That translates to hundreds of dollars slashed from your yearly energy bills, all generated by a heap of decaying yard waste that the local municipality was literally paying to get rid of. The thermodynamics behind this are rock solid and undeniable. Microbes don't care about utility company monopolies. They just break down timber, vent extreme heat, and power your morning showers for 6 solid months. That is the schedule, that is your total cost, and that is how you build it. Now, if a simple pile of mulch can entirely replace a modern water heater, just wait until you find out what that exact same compost setup can do for your kitchen stove. To see that process in action, go ahead and click the video linked in the playlist below.